Welcome to the Live Big podcast, where real estate expert Nick Paynes shows you that everyone can build wealth through real estate investing. Nick and his featured guests will give you the tools, resources, and expert information you need to leverage real estate into a wealth-building strategy, so you can stop worrying about your 9-to-5 and start to live big. Here's Nick with today's episode.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Live Big podcast. This is episode 6. I'm here with Matt Kurkowski again. Take you back to episode 1. Thanks for being here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Always good to have Matt around. Our other partner seems to escape our podcast whenever we...
I think he's trying to avoid us.
I think that's what it is. He's always got something going on. And it's always last minute. He's always like, oh yeah, I'm in. And then last night, I think it was 10:55 that he wasn't going to be here. Yeah. So anyway, we'll have a good episode today. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of best and worst experiences as an income property owner. I don't want to specify it necessarily as a landlord, but really just owning income property. So Matt, just kind of start us off with what has income property ownership in general? What has it done for you? Like in a positive light, what has it done for you in your life?
I guess I should say it's changed like me and my wife and our family. It's changed our life completely. We live in a different neighborhood than we would had we, had I just stayed on the career path I was on. I wouldn't have felt comfortable buying the house we're in now. It's changed our life. So that's the easiest way to say it, I guess.
Sure. And I guess like you don't have a normal career anymore. You quit your job.
I quit my job. So it's definitely changed in that regard. I used to be in the insurance industry. Now I get to look at houses and, manage contractors and do Airbnb stuff and all the things that real estate can do. There's a million ways you can go in real estate, and I get to play around and have fun with all of them. Not all of them, a lot of them.
And I feel like you could legitimately tell people, like if people asked you what you did, I feel like you could legitimately tell people you're retired.
Oh yeah, I usually do because it's, you just get a second look from that. Like, wow.
Yeah, they're like, what? How old are you? You're like, oh, I'm 36, 37 years old. And they're like, you're retired? Like, well, I mean, and then you can kind of go into like what you do. But I mean, if you don't feel like it's work, right? It's just like anything else. If you like really enjoy your job, then you don't. But the flexibility that it gives you, I wouldn't. There's a lot of work involved. Don't get me wrong, right? Like what you and Charlie do and what we do on a daily basis. Like there's a lot of work involved, but we can do it kind of on our own time. You can do it from anywhere in the world for the most part, right? Like we don't have the same restrictions that somebody might have that's working a 9-to-5 or that's working a salary job. So like the flexibility and the freedom that it gives you makes you kind of feel like you're retired, right? Yeah, and I think the second piece of that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you were to stop the building of the portfolio or the building of the kind of empire that you're working on, you would be pretty darn close to retired. I mean, anyway, what is the amount of properties you have? How much work would you say goes into those in any given day or week or whatever? Just the ones that
are stabilized.
Yeah, the ones that are stabilized, not the ones that you're currently doing work on, right? Like the ones that are stabilized and they're rented, what would you say, is the amount of work that you put in on a weekly basis, say?
It's not a ton. I mean, it's on long-term rentals, the most amount of work you put in is when you're getting a new tenant in. Generally speaking, on a long-term rental, and when I say long-term rental, that's year-long leases, because we also have short-term rentals like Airbnb, where it's 2 to a night to a month, whatever. On the long-term side, it's that first period getting someone in there, and then after that, generally, we have properties that are remodeled and in pretty good shape, so we don't generally have to worry about a whole lot of maintenance. But every now and then something comes up. Today we had a clogged sewer line, so we're calling a company to snake that out and get it cleaned up, and it took me half an hour.
Yeah, a couple of phone calls or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, it's not a lot on those. And honestly, even the short-term rental side, we've done some stuff to automate that and help with messaging and making it easier. Even that's not a whole lot. And again, it's kind of, if you consider that work, it's, you got your phone out and someone messages you and you answer the question they have or whatever.
Just being available, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think mentally, and emotionally, you feel like you're doing more work than you are because your brain is always there. You're always having to be available for that call or be available for those text messages or whatever. So there is always going to be a piece of you, but I always feel like, okay, I'd rather be like emotionally or like mentally having to be attached to it, because I can do that from Mexico or Hawaii or whatever. And if it doesn't come up, there's nothing I have to worry about, right? Versus like somebody that might go to work and clock in a 9-to-5 job and not have much to do, but you have to be there,
physically be there,
And so I think that's great. And I think, for Charlie, it's really similar. Charlie quit his job, right? Mm-hmm. Charlie quit his job too. He's in that same boat. So like, again, he can kind of be like, well, I'm retired. For me, I don't, it hasn't necessarily put me in a position that I could quit my job. But if I'm being honest, like I don't really want to. I enjoy my job, right? I really like what I do. I like coming to the office. I like helping people with real estate. But it has given me some other things. Like it has let my wife quit her job, right? So your wives are still working, right? But you'll get to a point, I think, in the very near future where they can quit their jobs if they want to.
Yeah, well, and we have those conversations and talk to them about it, and they're not ready to quit, and I don't want to at this point. I think they, get satisfaction out of going to work, and my wife always tells me that I don't do a good job of, praising the work that she does. That she wouldn't.
Well, here's your opportunity because she might listen to this.
Well, exactly. So she does a great job. She does so much stuff around the house with the kids, for our family. I couldn't do any of what we have in real estate without her.
Right.
Where we are is, all because of her too. So,
there's definitely a partnership that's involved there, right? Like, the growth of my real estate career, not necessarily my rental business or my income property business, but the growth of my real estate career is heavily centered around the partnership that my wife and I have, right? Like she is essentially a full-time employee for my business, my Meta Homes team, right? She plans all of our events and that kind of stuff. And that again wouldn't be possible without her being able to quit her job. And quitting her job was a combination, of the fact that she was going to come work for me, which would help me build my business. But at that point, there was no income to support that, right? Mm-hmm. So it was like, okay, she's going to have to come to my business, help me support, and I'm going to have to make up her income with that support. But knowing that we had this rental income coming on the other side, there was the idea that, okay, we could dip into that if we needed to, right?
Yeah, so it's that fallback plan.
Yeah, so it gives you that comfort, right? So, but I think what it has allowed me to do, like I said, has allowed Jess to quit her job, and not only that, she has so much more flexibility, right? She was a teacher, so that's a 7 to 6 job during the school year. Like it's not a 9 to 5, it's a 7 to 6, and a little bit of grading on weekends. It's a lot of hours, right? And this new job that she does, she can do it on her own terms. She can work 10 hours here, 5 hours here, 3 hours here. She can work 20 hours a week and probably get it done. She's very efficient, right? So, but it's allowed me especially to cut back on parts of my life in general, not even my business, but cut back on parts of my life that I don't enjoy, right? And so it gives us the opportunity to do things that we want to do versus the things that we have to do, right? So like this podcast, for example, right? This is something that I really enjoy doing. I don't make any money doing this. And it takes me hours to prepare for these things and put topics together and get the equipment ready and, get people to come on, connect with people to come on and do the podcast with me. Like this takes time out of my day. I don't make any money doing it, but I enjoy doing it because I like educating people about real estate. And that's that's my favorite part of the business, right? Is my favorite part of all the business. I don't make any money doing the actual education piece. I don't make any money doing it. And I'm okay with that because if I can support it somewhere else, like this is what I enjoy.
Yeah.
And so that's the biggest thing, is that it's given me freedom and it's given me choices, right? And for me, for me personally, those are the two most valuable things in life. The choice to be able to be at home with my kids if I want to, or go on vacation if I want to, or not be around on the weekend, or, go up to the mountains, and the freedom to do those things as well.
Yeah.
Right. And not be strapped or not be held back either by time or a job or finances or whatever. Like the amount of freedom and choice that this extra income and this security of equity, because it's not even the income for me a lot of times, right? The cash flow itself isn't like this crazy amount of, again, I couldn't quit my job, but the amount of equity that I hold in the properties is like a security blanket.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, if things were to go completely south, I could at least sell some property and be supported for a few years.
It's a good backup plan for a lot of things.
Yeah.
And you don't have to sell. There's so many other ways. I mean,
totally.
I
would go get a job before I did that.
Yeah, that's your worst case scenario.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a million steps before that, but yeah, it gives you that security to make decisions you wouldn't otherwise.
That's right.
Like quitting my job, I wouldn't. I mean, honestly, I probably wasn't ready to do it when it happened, but we were just so busy with things going on that I just didn't have the time to do both.
Right.
And I was like, I got to talk to my wife about this. And she's like, yeah, you should do it. Why are you still working? And that was not the answer I expected to hear from her. She's like, yeah, this works. Just do it. And it's been the best thing we've done. We've grown exponentially since then. So
that's awesome. So, all right, that's the good. It's kind of life-changing. We've already talked about that a little bit in prior episodes, and having the mindset to get where you want to get and make some choices and make yourself uncomfortable, right? Like none of these choices were comfortable choices, right? These are step outside your comfort zone and make a life-changing decision, right? So that's the good side. Let's talk about the bad side. Let's talk about the realities of the things that come up that the average person doesn't have to deal with, the things that happen to us that could be, maybe we look at them and they, they're detrimental, but some people look at it and they go, that would ruin me. Right. Mm-hmm. Talk about some of your experiences, because there's one in general that I'm thinking of that I'm going to bring up if you don't, but talk about some of your negative experiences.
So I'd say the worst, man, in general, I think we've had pretty good experience with real estate. So just start with that. The worst experience, I think I'd probably go with a contractor that we hired on a remodel that we were working on. Bought actually a really good deal. It should have been at the end. We were going to remodel as a duplex. We were going to remodel the basement, finish the basement, add some bedrooms, be worth more on the back end. It would rent for more. It would have been a really good deal. We'd have got a really good return on the money we had in the deal. And it didn't work out that way because the contractor, honestly, it was on us. Our normal contractor we work with was busy. So we were trying to do 2 projects at once, hired someone that we hadn't typically worked with, and stuff wasn't getting done. We continued to pay, and that's on us. And we paid and paid and paid. And a lot of things got done. Nothing got done right. And we ended up basically having to rip everything out that this contractor did, start essentially from the beginning again, and redo it all.
So did this guy, did he take off with your money, or did he just do poor work?
Did poor work. So he would bounce around. And there was a bunch of red flags, and we kind of knew him going in. We've done a bunch of remodels. We have a pretty good idea of what it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. We have, generally, we're not beat to the dollar, but we know pretty well what it's going to be. And his budget was half of what it should have been, and his timeline was less than half of how long it was going to take. And we're like, that doesn't sound right. We're like, well, whatever. If it's double the budget and double the amount of time, it's in line with what we expect. We're fine with that. So we're thinking, he's just going to start low and, add on as we go. What ended up happening is, he kind of knew a little bit about everything, but didn't know how to do anything. And so he'd start a project over here, he'd start some plumbing, and then he wouldn't get that done. So plumbing's half done. And he'd start working over in another room and do some of the, HVAC. He was doing something over here, and then start drywall in the basement. We're like, why are you drywalling? We don't have the stuff behind the walls done yet. And so he's like, well, I gotta, I need my money. It's the money so I can pay my guys to get out here so we can finish that up, and then we'll keep moving on. And it just kept going on and on like that. And we see a little bit of progress, and eventually we ended up just having to cut ties. And
yeah. So do you mind sharing like how much you lost? Are you okay sharing that?
Yeah, it was a lot. It was like $100,000 we spent on that we didn't have to.
Okay. So like 100,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is one of my points for this, like, right, like that number is crippling.
It's a lot of money.
Okay. To a lot of people.
It sucks.
It sucks, right? But you moved on, and it is what it is. And it cost you 100,000, which means it probably cost you all your profit and some, maybe a little bit, right? Maybe you were going to profit 70 on the deal, and now you're going to lose 30, right? So you can't lose what you don't have in the first place. Okay. So if you were to break even, you'd be like, okay, lesson learned.
Time.
And it's just time, and we didn't lose any money. Okay. But you're going to lose 30, 40, 50 grand, let's say.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, that number for a lot of people is crippling. I mean, would destroy them financially. Right. But the idea here, again, is that you put yourself into a position where that number isn't crippling. That number isn't so detrimental that it just ruins your life. Right. And so, when you first started out, okay, when you were a brand new flipper or a brand new acquiring property, would you have done a project like this? Would you have done a duplex?
I think the project itself, yes. There was nothing wrong with the deal itself. It was the way we went about it.
Okay.
Because we were kind of trying to grow and split and use a contractor we hadn't worked with. There's a bunch of things we did wrong.
Right.
We didn't get a contract up front on this is the timeline. This is, you're going to have this done by this date, and then you'll get paid this amount. If we had done that, we'd have been like, okay, well, you're not done with X.
So you're not
getting paid.
And so a big piece of that is you wouldn't, as a brand new person, or maybe it's your second, you wouldn't have taken that big of a risk, right? Because knowing, you knew you were taking a risk because there were red flags all over the place, but you're like, dang it, because I've done that before too, where somebody's so cheap and it says they're going to do it so quickly that I'm like, there's just no way. But if you do, sweet. I just found myself a new contractor for life.
Yeah.
Right. And if they don't, and it takes them twice as long, that's what my normal person would have done anyway. So we're like, okay, we found another good contractor. And unfortunately, like those red flags, they pretty much always, like, there's a reason, right? Because they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand their trade. And so, I think that's a good example of some of the things that can happen in like rehab work, for example. What about like, I know you just recently went through an eviction, right? Tell me what happened there and what was kind of the process.
So it was the first eviction we've ever had to do. It was on a property that we purchased. And so we inherited the tenant that came along with it. And they started off fine. We're paying for the first couple months and then stopped paying. And, with that process, we, whenever someone doesn't pay, we send out a 10-day notice. And that depends on where you're at. If, you're in Colorado, that's what it is. You have a 10-day notice you have to give them to, give them a chance to fix the problem, essentially. So we did that, didn't get anything. And we always send that notice out. And then we have a list of organizations and charities that can help with rent. Because our goal is always, I'd never want someone to get evicted. I mean, that's their house where they live. That's a worst case scenario. So we always try and help people out first. But communication stopped, which is the big thing is, we said, hey, talk to these charities, see if they can help. Let us know what's going on. I think they were working with like the COVID relief money. And for a while there was communication, and then that stopped. And that's when we actually posted the 10-day notice and had to start that process. And then we actually had to go file paperwork at the court, and then kind of just wait. We had to get the sheriff out to post it or serve it. So they are like physically served, so they know they have to go to court. Like this is happening. They're going to get kicked out of the house if they don't pay or do something.
Right.
Which it's always the worst situation. And even for them, I mean, if they would have just left, that would have been preferable for everyone, because we don't have to go through that whole process. They don't have an eviction on their record, so they can go find another place without, that stigma attached to them going forward, which is going to make it harder for them.
Right.
They didn't, unfortunately. And so we had to go through the whole eviction process. It's not complicated, but it is kind of just confusing. It's, all the paperwork and file this. And I remember being down at the courthouse, and you got to fill out this form and take it over to that window. And then from there, you go downstairs to the sheriff's office and do this. And, there's nothing hard about it. It's
like cumbersome. It's just, and it's interesting, after all these years of rentals, that's like you one eviction.
Yeah. Well, and I think the reason for that is because
it was an inherited tenant.
We didn't do the screening that we would normally do. We're always looking for, someone that has a stable job and stable income. We're making sure they're not overextending themselves for the rent, so that they don't get into that position. They have a bunch of credit card debt, or that kind of thing. And life happens. Some medical stuff can come up, and it can happen to anyone.
Right.
But we try and make that as least chance as possible.
Yeah, and I knock on wood, like I've never had an eviction either, right? I've never had to go through an eviction. I think a big piece of that, again, comes from the front end, just vetting tenants properly, right? So I'm the same way. I know there's places out there that, for example, they'll allow your income to be 2x your rent. I think it's way too much. You're going to be rent burdened like crazy. If you make $5,000 a month and you're paying $2,500 a month in rent, you have nothing left. Like I require 3x. And because I don't want them to be rent burdened. And when I run their credit, not only do I look to make sure they're 3x, but I make sure they don't have $1,000 car payment and a bunch of school loans and a bunch of other stuff that they have to pay for that comes up on their credit report. Now all of a sudden I know that they're not going to have much money left, right? So we take those things into consideration, and then just throughout the process, being kind to your tenants and just understanding, like, how can we help you? Like reaching out to people that maybe haven't been able to make a payment, be like, how can we help? Like, what can we do? Can we set up a payment plan for you? Like, help me help you. Just be responsive, right? Like that's the biggest thing, is when people become unresponsive, we can no longer help them anymore. Yeah. And landlords tend to be vilified, right? So much that like, but the majority of them, they're just like anything else. Like there's good ones and there's bad ones, but the majority of them are really good and want to help people. And ultimately rentals are win-win situations, right? If there were no rentals, there'd be a lot of people living on the streets, because there's a lot of people that can't qualify to buy a house, don't have the ability to buy a house. So where are they going to live? They've got to rent somewhere, right? And so if there's no rentals, because landlords are so heavily restricted or vilified, like it's not a good thing. Right. So the reality is it's a win-win situation. Somebody gets a nice, comfortable place to live, doesn't have the ability to buy. Okay. And the other person is running a business out of it. Right. So I'll tell a quick story about my kind of worst experience. And again, I think it's nice to preface the fact that for the most part, I've had really, really good experiences. Right. But bad stuff happens, bad stuff comes up. We have people that pay their rent late, and that'll happen. And I also believe that as a landlord, if you don't have the money to be able to make 1 month of mortgage payment on that property without rent, you probably shouldn't have that property. Yeah. Right. So if you're like knocking down their door saying like, you better pay me, I can't pay the mortgage, like that's maybe on you. You maybe should have done a better job budgeting, knowing that you've got this added expense and that it is possible that your renter won't pay you. So, if the problem is when you get put into a bad situation because you need the money, you start to act in a way that is going to just cause defensiveness from the tenant, right? And now you're going to be in a situation where they're definitely not going to pay you, because they're like, at this point, they're like, screw you. I'm not going to pay you. You're coming knocking on my door, screaming at me, versus calling them and saying like, hey, how can I help? What can we do to make this, work for you? So anyway, my situation, and it's really funny because my situation is a tenant situation, but it's similar to yours. And I knew it was going to happen. Like I knew better. There were so many red flags, right? So I had this property that came up for rent. Person moved out, put it up for rent. And I can't remember exactly, but I I wasn't like blowing up with applications. So I didn't have a ton to choose from, but I had this one guy he's a younger kid, and his income definitely didn't support the rent. Right. So he was, I think the rent at the time was like right around 2,000 or $2,200 a month or something like that. And his income was like a shade over 40,000 a year. Right. So he was like, it was like 2x tops.
Yeah.
Right. Was the amount that he was making. And so, but he assured me, he seemed like a really nice guy, had good character. I think he had a decent credit score, if I remember correctly, but he was like, he seemed like a good guy. But I will say one of the things that like, I was like, when I first met him, he kind of just seemed like a stoner to me. Right. I was like, all right, this guy, even though I don't allow smoking in my house, like this guy's going to smoke weed in my house. And he's like, no, I'm really respectful. He's like, I do smoke on occasion, but I don't smoke cigarettes and I just smoke weed. It'll be outside. At the time, marijuana is legal in Colorado or whatever. And I was like, you know what? I just need to get this place filled. Mistake number one.
Yep.
Okay. Anytime you put yourself in a position where you're like, I need to get this place filled, mistake number one. So the other thing is he showed up. He kind of confirmed that I made a good choice at this time. He showed up and paid me first month's rent, deposit, and a prorated first month's rent because he moved in like in the middle of the month in cash, like handed me a stack of like $6,000 in cash. And I was like, all right, the guy's got the money, like whatever, no big deal. So anyway, he's living in the property. I think he was there for, I don't know, 6 months, 8 months, maybe even a year. Maybe we even had renewed his lease and we went into the second year. And he calls me one day and he goes, hey, Nick, he goes, and he was a really respectful guy, but he called me and he goes, hey, man, would you mind if I grew my legal limit at the house? Like grew marijuana at the house. And I don't know what I was thinking. Mistake number two. I was like, I remember being really stressed at work at the time. And this is before my real estate career, but I remember being really stressed at work. And I was like, I didn't want to deal with it. And I knew that if I told him no, he was going to do it anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, he's going to do it regardless. And then I'm going to have to go through an eviction process. And I don't want to deal with that. And I don't want to deal with saying no and having him leave and then having to get a new tenant because I'm stressed right now. And this is the last thing I need on my plate.
Yeah.
So I said, yeah, that's fine, man. He's like, I promise, like, I'll take good care of your property. You don't have anything to worry about. Okay, no problem. So anyway, he does that. And I end up going over to the house at some point shortly after that. And I find out that he has built like a grow room in my garage. So I have a 400 square foot garage, 20 by 20. He has framed out the entire garage and insulated it. Okay. And built an entire grow room. Right. And there are plants everywhere. Right. Go into the house. He built out a portion of the basement, framed it out, like inside another room, made another room, framed it out, insulated it, lights, everything, and then had his like exhaust going out, cut a big hole in the side of my house to exhaust out the stuff. And there's plants everywhere. And I was like, there's no way this is your legal like limit
amount you're allowed.
And he goes, well, it is. And here's why. He says both me and my roommate have what's called an EPC or an extended plant count. Okay. So back then you could have 6 plants, but if you had an extended plant count, you could have 20 per person.
Jeez.
So we had 40 marijuana plants in the house. Okay. He had, I couldn't see exactly how he did it. And I think I figured this out after the fact, but the amount of, a lot of times the way people tell there's a grow house is because the electric bill is insane. Well, he had tapped into the electric before it hit the meter. So he was stealing electric from Excel, right? The whole interior of the house was, well, just the one room in the interior house and the entire garage was like framed out and built out. And he kept reassuring me. He's like, Nick, I promise, man, I will put it back the way it's supposed to be. At this point, I'm like super upset and I'm really frustrated. And I was like, okay. And again, I'm still super stressed at work. I don't want to deal with it. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I go online and I see that there are grow-friendly rentals throughout Colorado, but they charge like a really exorbitant rate. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. So I called them and I said, here's the only way I'm letting you stay. You're going to double your deposit, first of all, right now. So you're going to give me another $2,000 or whatever it is. I said, and then your rent's going from $2,000 to $3,000 a month, right? And he was like, sure, no problem. That's when I knew, okay, this guy's making money, and no wonder he has no problem paying his rent because he's selling tons of weed, right? So anyway, about 6 months go by with this new agreement, not really having any issues. And he stops paying me. And I can't get a hold of him. 2 weeks later, I can't get a hold of him. Finally, he calls me. He's like, hey, man, I'm really sorry. He's like, I've been going through some stuff. And basically, it ends up one of his buddies that does the same thing got injured in a pressing accident. Like they were pressing the oils or whatever out of the plants. And one of their presses like blew up or something and like blew the side of this guy's face off or something. He was in the hospital. He's like, I gave all my money to him and his girlfriend because he's in the hospital. He's like, I don't have any money. I was like, okay, well, what are we going to do? I was like, cause you got this, you got my house that you jacked up. So anyway, I said, I'll make you a deal. I said, because right now you're breaking lease. And I said, and you've got 6 months left on your lease at $3,000. So technically I can take you to court and I can sue you for $18,000 plus all the damages to my property. I said, I'll make you a deal. Get my house back to normal. Pay me 1 month, pay me what you owe me so far, and then 1 month's more rent. Okay. And I'll let you out of your lease. At this point, I'm just throwing a Hail Mary, hoping he'll give me something, right? And then so he goes, okay. And I said, I promise if you are out by August 31st or whatever date it was, right, that I will let you out of your lease and we'll shake hands and we'll be good. So anyway, he did. He took down all of he basically put everything back to the way it was, which I was really impressed with. There were a couple things like some crappy drywall patches and stuff like that. But for the most part, you get everything out of there. The only thing was during that time, he didn't really take care of the yard. So he had destroyed the yard, which that was one of my houses. And I spent a ton of money, time, and effort making this beautiful yard, and this guy destroyed it. So it like really bugged me. But anyway, what ended up happening was I kept his $4,000 deposit. I got an extra month of rent at $2,000. And that was the other deal I made him is if he got out on time, I would only charge him the $2,000 instead of the $3,000 rent. So I ended up with an extra $6,000, which was basically enough for me to go in and fix everything, fix up the yard, clean everything up that needed to be cleaned up, remediate the things that need to be remediated, and get it back out there. So the kind of the moral of that story was that could have been way worse. Like I really lucked out. And I'll tell you the reason I lucked out is because I was always nice to the guy. Even when he wasn't paying, even when he wasn't responding, I never sent him nasty messages. I just kept saying, hey man, please reach out. Just talk to me. That's all I'm asking right now. Like, I'm not even asking you to pay your rent. Just call me. Yeah. And 2-3 weeks after ghosting me, he finally called me. He's like, hey man, I'm really sorry. This is what's going on. I said, I get it. How can we remedy this situation? Didn't yell at him, didn't get upset with him, didn't tell him I had to make a mortgage payment, just like tried to reason with him. And I do the same thing now. Like if I have a renter that isn't paying, I'm like, can you pay half? I try to get what I can now because I know that as tempers potentially flare, and I don't ever get like that, but you never know. They might, right? And so I got to a point where I was like, just accepting of this is what it is. And I'm going to try to get what I can. So the kind of the moral of that story is it could have been way, way worse. And there were red flags from the very start. So it's funny because both you and I, our worst things that we can think about in ownership are things that we could have and should have avoided with the red flags that presented themselves. Right. And so I know there's situations where, you see like horror stories of the way tenants treat properties and things like that. But I think 99.9% of the time, those can be avoided with proper vetting up front and with proper, just treating people properly. Yeah.
Just the communication you have with them.
It's huge, And so, and I'll be honest, I've created some really great relationships. I have some people that were tenants. First of all, I have tenants that turn into clients for me, right? So I've sold 3 homes to tenants, and those people, I keep in touch with those people because I always keep in touch with all my clients, right? So like to this day, I still keep in touch with those people that were tenants of mine. One of them specifically, And here's why, like, I think it's important to vet your tenants, you personally, because if you use a property management company, they have to abide by all kinds of guidelines, and they literally qualify people on their ability to repay, right? Their credit and their ability to repay. You and I, when we sit down with somebody, we can look past some of those things. We still want those things, but we look at character. There's plenty of people that have ability to repay and have great credit score, and they're just terrible people. I don't want those people in one of my most expensive or most precious assets. And I don't want to deal with that person, right? Some people are just bad people. They're unkind. They're mean. They're just bad people. I don't want those type of people, right? So we can judge on character. So I have given people second chances. I've given people opportunities. I had one guy that came in that was like, hey man, I want to let you know because you're going to find it out anyway. He's like, but I have a felony on my record. I said, okay, are you okay talking about it? He said, sure. He told me exactly what he did. I won't disclose any of that, but he told me exactly what he did. And I said, okay. I said, people make mistakes. Wasn't a nasty, violent type crime, but it was, he made a mistake. It was 7 years ago or something like that. He went back to school, got his degree, cleaned up his act, got a good job. And I was like, you deserve it. People deserve a second chance. Yeah. That guy was a great tenant. And he became a client of mine, and he's someone I still talk to this day, right? So I built some great relationships throughout it. And I think the big piece is people get scared because the only thing they see are the horror stories on the media.
Yeah, well, those are the only interesting stories to tell.
Right. That's why maybe this podcast is interesting today, because we told some, but ours isn't even that fun. I've seen some way worse stuff, but we just don't have that many bad experiences.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, from the get-go, generally things have been really good.
Yeah, I mean, if we're running things properly, you don't run into those big issues that you see, in the news, in the media.
Yeah, I think if you treat it like a business, you vet the tenant. It's not your cousin's mom's sister's friend that you're going to help out. There's times for that, but even that person, you're still going to do the same background checks, screenings, and treat the house, your biggest asset, like a business, and you'll be okay.
And I think that goes into our last point here before we wrap up, and that this is the kind of key point, is to understand that as a landlord, you're running a business, right? And so many people fall into the kind of what I call the landlord trap, right? So when you own a business, you have to run it like a business. It's pretty simple. It's if you wanted to open a coffee shop, you need to know what things cost you and your profit margins and, your cost to acquire a customer and all that kind of stuff. You need to have a profit and loss statement, and you should have all these things, right? So again, we talked about people vilifying landlords because they think that we're just money hungry, greedy people that again, this is generally win-win situations. You could call any of my tenants and I think they would tell you that they're very happy with where they're at and they're okay with what they're paying. It is what they could go somewhere else and pay that same amount and probably not have as good of a landlord. Okay. I can promise you that I have plenty of tenants that would be wonderful testimonials for the way, because I always tell my tenants, I'll treat you like family. If I wouldn't let my family stay in the house for a certain problem that it has, I won't let you stay there either. So the heater goes out and it's -7 degrees like it was last night, I will put you in a hotel, or I will buy space heaters for every room in your house until I can get your furnace fixed. I won't just be like, hey, sorry, it's going to take me 3 days to get an HVAC guy out there, right? I'm going to take care of you in the interim, because I wouldn't do that to my family. I wouldn't do that to my kids that they're freezing at night and be like, sorry, it is what it is. No, we go stay at somebody's house or we go get a hotel. I'll take care of you, right? So, the problem is there's a fine line between running a good business and a bad one, right? And so one of the biggest traps that I think landlords fall into is they get complacent, right? Because they don't like confrontation with the tenant. Well, there doesn't have to be confrontation. If you keep a good professional relationship and you're kind to people, they understand that you own this asset and that you do run a business, right? So when I go to them and say, hey, just to let you know, this upcoming year, I need to increase rent by 3% or whatever, they'll either say, okay, sounds good, thank you for letting us know, Or they may push back and say why, and then you can share why. Well, my expenses went up as well. So my insurance has gone up, the HOA has gone up, my property taxes have gone up, all this has gone up, right? And so one of the things that happen is that people don't like that confrontation. They don't want to have that conversation. So what they do is they'll charge 50% of market rent. Okay, and 50%, I've seen far less. I've actually seen significantly less than 50%, just because, quote unquote, the tenant has been there for 10 years and they're a great tenant. They've been there for 10 years as a great tenant. I don't want to rock the boat, right? And I always have to laugh a little bit when I hear that, because while I appreciate that sentiment, I'm going to make an analogy that will show you how dumb that statement is, right? The analogy is, if I owned a gas station and you came and filled up your tank with gas every single week, okay, you were a regular. It was right down the street from your house every single week for the last 10 years. Would I give you the price of gas 10 years ago today?
That would be amazing.
It would never happen.
It would never happen.
That would never happen. If you had been a tenant of mine for 20 years, I remember about 20 years ago when I was 17, there was a point where gas was like 99 cents, 89 cents a gallon. If I had been a patron of a single gas station and never left anywhere else, do you think that gas station owner would be like, oh, Nick still gets 99 cents a gallon?
He's a good client.
You actively take a loss as a business owner. No.
Yeah.
You wouldn't do it. It just makes no sense. And me as a client, as a patron, as a tenant, whatever you want to be, wouldn't even expect that.
Yeah.
So your tenants expect you to charge market rent. Your tenants expect you to raise rent on a monthly basis or on a yearly basis. Every time you renew your lease, they expect that there's going to be some type of increase in rent.
And honestly, it's a good thing for both sides, because on the flip side, the landlord that doesn't increase the rent, are they taking care of the property the same way?
Nope.
So the quality is going to continually go down. The place they're staying in is, it's probably cheap compared to what they could get, but it's also getting run down. It's, they don't have the incentive to go fix that up.
Yep.
They're not getting the same rent they could have got.
And to go one level deeper, you become an enabler. What happens is you charge this person $1,000 a month rent, and then you decide it's in your best interest at some point to sell the property. And then that person now has to go out and face the real world where rent is $2,200, $2,300 a month. You think they're going to be able to afford that? After 10 years of paying $1,000 a month and living, people don't live below their means. If they had extra money, they were spending it. Now, all of a sudden, this person has to go out and face a $1,300 per month increase in rent. No. And that's why you've got to do it even annually. You got to raise it 2%. You got to raise it 3% annually, because if you don't, and you wait 3 or 4 years and you go to them and you hit them with a $500 rent increase, you're going to get tons of pushback. They're probably going to leave, even though they can't find something else different. Okay. They can't find anything else better, but you're going to be met with a ton of pushback. If you just did it gradually, okay, you would be in much better shape. People can adjust, right? So those are some of the big mistakes that people make. I think that's the biggest mistake, because when you really extrapolate that over a 10-year period, you're talking it could be hundreds, depending on if you have multiple properties, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost market rent, right? Which if you're such a philanthropist that you're giving away 50% rent, don't. And then take all that extra money you made and go start a charity. That hundreds of thousands of dollars that you make above and beyond, if you're that big of a philanthropist, that you're going to go start a charity and go give that money away to
That's a lot of
start a fair housing, or start an affordable housing community if you want to, if that's really what you're passionate about, right? But my point is you're not doing anybody any favors by not keeping up, right? And then you're going to hurt yourself in the long run too, because when you're not keeping up with the property. And if you have to sell it tenant occupied, you know how many investors are chomping at the bit to buy a property that's under rented by 50%? Nobody. So you know what your property's worth? Nothing. You won't even be able to sell it. You'll take a massive hit for somebody to go, yeah, I'm willing to take a 9-month loss until this person's, lease ends.
Nice.
And then what's going to happen? is that person's going to get kicked out on the streets anyway. So if you're doing it because you're like, oh, well, I don't really, I want them to be able to stick around. I really like them. You're not doing anybody any favors. I promise.
Yeah.
So, well, cool. I think that's really covers everything I wanted to talk about today. I think that the biggest piece is if one of your fears of not getting into, real estate ownership or income property ownership is that you're going to have tenants that destroy your house, or you're going to, nobody's going to pay rent. Those stories are few and far between. And the reality is just be a good person, treat people the way that you would want to be treated, and you will do fine with your tenants. And, maybe learn some lessons from us. Anytime you see red flags, just know that there's red flags for a reason. So
definitely for a reason.
Exactly. So thank you so much for joining in today. Appreciate it, Matt. Thanks again for being a part of this one.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
You bet. And until next time, live big.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Live Big podcast. For even more real estate and investment resources, go to blackyettigroup.com/resources and download Nick's complete guide to running your own rental properties. Tune back in next week for another episode, and until then, live big.
Live Big does not provide investment, legal, or tax advice, and nothing herein should be construed as being financial, legal, tax, or other advice. Live Big does not represent that any securities or services discussed are suitable for any investor. No investment or other decision should be made solely based on the contents or information found on the website or podcast. When making a decision about your investments, you should seek the advice of a professional financial advisor or qualified expert.